The Locust from Dr. Nowhere versus Larry from Come Play, two horror characters from alternate worlds that connect to our world through our technology. These monsters are horrifying to us, but taking a closer look at them, they actually are far more tragic than you might think they are. But today, we are here to figure out if these two ever were to cross paths with each other, who would win in the end of the day? That's what we are here to find out. So, without further ado, let's introduce our characters. The world of Dr. Nowhere is a very strange one. On the surface, it seems to be simple, similar to our world. But when looking closer into this world, it is way more complex than you might first believe. It has key differences, like the fact that creatures from different dimensions appear in the world, seemingly at random, that roam around, and they are beyond our comprehension of basic understanding of what is normal. This is a system called the Oddity Compodium, a bizarre concept that has creatures from many different dimensions of many different types, with the creatures coming from it certainly being odd to say the least. Like ones that disguise as your bed, or creatures that try to convince you to eat chairs, or even obelisks filled with endless knowledge that will make your head explode if you hear their message. But there is this one organism, one of the earliest known ones we've learned about in the system, one that interacts with our worlds through screens. It is constantly hungry and desperate for attention. This is the Locust. The Locust is an interesting entity, a creature that seems to be made of both organic flesh and some type of metal throughout its body. It's a little hard to figure out fully what this is, but from what we do know, most of the time this creature stays within a room of strange symbols, waiting for the next connection it can make, and once someone interacts with its world through a screen, and it will try to break through the screen on the other end until it can enter our world, where it will then proceed to hunt the person it is going after and feast on them. But it is very different in how it kills people than a traditional hunter, because it prefers our organs, but it leaves our body relatively untouched, just taking the organs, and it is almost unstoppable on its hunt to get them. Because the Locust has several abilities that make it hard for anyone to stop it, because it can travel through technology and theoretically expose itself to almost any type of screen, and manipulate its voice in order to intercept messages to connect with people to open its screen, so it can break into our world through it. And, as we mentioned, it can extract organs to such a perfect degree that the body seems untouched. It also seems to be able to morph its arms to a certain degree, being able to turn its arm from a hand into long blade-like arms, and even seeming to be able to grow in size, with it potentially reaching up to 23 feet tall at its maximum height. And it is no slouch when it comes to physical abilities. It can easily overpower a person and is most likely faster than the average one as well. And at its full size of 23 feet, assuming that it doesn't lose speed from its lower and smaller form due to its oddities, it could potentially travel around 27 miles per hour in a full sprint. And at its base strength, since its size seems to be around 9 to 10 feet tall, it is most likely able to exert forces around 15 kilojoules based on how it was stated it could break out of titanium reinforced carbon fiber glass. And using its full size of 23 feet and its maximum of 27 miles per hour, it could theoretically exert forces around 878 kilojoules at maximum. It is so much stronger than most things in nature, and even the military struggles to keep track of this thing due to how it works. And even when they get it back in its screen, all it takes for it to get out is when it gets hungry again, and it will eventually escape, as long as there's some type of open screen for it to interact with our world from. But despite the horror that this creature brings, there's always something that has never made it seem to be as simple as just a monster. The way it behaves is bizarre for a creature that eats organs. It seems to have a childlike curiosity about our world, and how it interacts with us. Even trying to talk to people, how it tries to say hello. Maybe it's just trying to mimic others and learn how to harvest their organs by luring them in, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it's actively trying to be a mimic, based on the fact there are toys in the room that it stays in, those that only really little ones would actually play with. And it always seems to try to talk to people before it goes on the hunt again, like it is genuinely trying to talk to them. And every time it speaks, it seems to be a bit of desperation in it. Like, the hunger isn't something it actually can control. Like, it wants to have a connection, but due to its hunger, it can never get it. Maybe it was a child once, or maybe it still is. Perhaps maybe it tries to be gentle with how it takes humans' organs, leaving the body untouched, because it might need to eat out of necessity, and not out of actual wanting to harm anyone. As far as we see, at least. And honestly, it's an almost sad creature to watch. When we see it sitting in its room, it's like it's waiting for something. It can't be described, but there's more to this creature than meets the eye, that much is clear. But in the end, regardless on how we view it, as it maybe could be just a monster that just wants to eat our organs and lure us in, or a tragic child just trying to develop a connection, either way, this thing is still a threat to humanity. It is something that can hardly be contained, and will continue to be feared because it will get hungry again, and will continue to try to connect with our world, and tragedy will always follow. When we look at our world, there's a lot of different things that allow an organism to thrive, rather from how they evolve to hunt, or how they adapt to their environment. But the biggest thing that allows any species to thrive is connection. A close connection is almost the most important thing that anyone could ever have. It's what allowed humans to thrive so much. But when it comes to connection, it's not always the easiest to obtain. From arguments that could put a strain on any relationship, or traumatic events that can make you unable to form any new ones, but the fact is, if you are alone, it's really hard to say you truly have a life. But it's not just humans who experience this. Even animals do, but also creatures from beyond our known universe are also things that experience this. Because what we view as a monster, they're not too far from what we are. And that's where we get to the creature known simply as Larry. Larry is a humanoid from a completely different dimension from ours, but even in that dimension, he's considered an outcast, having no connection at all to anyone, almost seemingly destined to be alone, desperate for one thing and one thing only, a friend. But after Larry learned about our world, and realizing that it can see us through electronics, it made the goal to try to make a friend from this world if his own won't accept him, with him searching for anyone who he can make some type of connection with. And eventually he set his sights on a child named Oliver, who was a autistic kid, who at the time had to communicate through only his tablet, almost never speaking in words ever, and due to a strained relationship with his previous friends that ended in problems, and his parents constantly being at odds with each other, he found himself in a very similar position, alone. Never really being able to form any type of proper connection either, and that's why Larry picked him as someone who understood the pain he went through, and if he was able to have Oliver as a friend, then neither of them would have to be alone. But while Larry might seem friendly on the surface, and tries to appear that way to anyone he wants to be friends with, Larry is a nightmare for anyone who gets in the way of it. Because Larry will stop at nothing to have a friend, and will end anyone who tries to stand in the way of that. Because Larry isn't simply a humanoid, he has lots of different abilities that make him extremely hard to deal with. Not only can he connect through any electrical point and interact with our world, and is almost completely invisible until his full story is read, and once his full story is read, he can exit his domain and enter our reality properly, with him being able to enter our world through any electrical source, and seemingly has the ability to control electricity in a sense. But Larry even can sense emotions. It's actually how he was even able to track Oliver in the first place, being able to understand how he felt and what he was going through, even without direct contact. And he can even sense potential interference with these plans, and does everything he can to make sure that will not be a problem. And Larry is ridiculously strong, with him being anywhere from around 9 to 10 feet tall, and even at the size he is unnaturally strong, even for his skinny stature. He can easily overpower people, and can flip around a table casually, pinning a kid to a wall, with this being a force of around a kilojoule at bare minimum to accomplish. And he can even break open locked toll booth doors, which would take around 12 kilojoules. But not only is Larry strong, he is pretty fast, with him being able to catch up to trucks, and to do it to the degree he did, Larry must have been traveling around 55 to 70 miles per hour, depending on the degree of when he started chasing. But at this speed, Larry could well exert forces around 130 to 307 kilojoules. And that's only his physical strength, because through his technological manipulation and him just going through it, he causes entire streets and neighborhoods to black out, with this being around 18 to 92 megajoules of energy just by him going through those areas, making him a force that almost no one could beat. And in the end, he did stop at nothing to make his friend, and did technically end up winning, even if it wasn't the friend he intended to have, with Oliver's mother extending her hand out in friendship, and Larry accepted it, with him transforming her and bringing her to his realm so they would be friends forever. Larry got what he wanted, but he wasn't heartless about it either, still wanting Oliver to be happy regardless on if he found friendship already. He allowed his mother to see him because, in the end, Larry isn't a monster, or even evil. He was an alone soul who just wanted connection, and regardless on how otherworldly he may be, you might be able to say he's almost human. Larry is a true example of what being deprived of connection can lead to, the threat that a person like this can actually cause, especially if they're desperate enough. And in the end, Larry is a reflection of that idea, our human nature of being lonely. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all. Now that we have taken a look at both of these characters, let's see how these two would fare if these two were to ever interact with each other. Let's break it down category by category, starting with their overall connection to reality, and how they interact with our electrical devices. And surprisingly, both of them have their advantages and disadvantage when it comes to this connection. The Locust is mostly limited to screens, and his electrical control is actually a lot more limited compared to Larry's, because the Locust only has access to our real world when a screen reaches his dimension, and he doesn't really seem to be able to control when that happens. It seems like someone has to actively get to his dimension first. Sure, he can develop the connection that brings that screen to the dimension, but the person actively needs to get into contact with it in order to actually fully open the gateway between them. And this connection can seemingly be shut off, and the Locust can't force you to look at the screen or prevent you from stopping its connection to your world. Even when it's hungry, while it may be able to escape eventually, it needs that connection to the screen in order to even get out in the first place. Larry, on the other hand, doesn't need that. While screens seem to be his most preferred method of traveling to our dimension, it's not the only way he can do it. A device only seemingly needs to be electrical for him to travel through it. And he can do it way more instantaneously than the Locust can, with the Locust having to actively break through the screen in order to make it, while Larry can pass through it. But Larry does have a weakness that the Locust doesn't seem to actually have. Larry is on a time limit. He can't stay outside of his domain forever, and doesn't really have as much free movement outside of his world than the Locust does, since there seems to need to be at least electronics nearby in order for him to fully be there. So at minimum, the Locust has a much longer time period he can be in the real world overall, and is a lot harder to actually get back into the screen since even the military has a hard time getting him back into it fully. And another thing for Larry that kind of puts him down a little bit is that his connection to electricity is also physical, because actually damaging electrical devices does seem to hurt him. Not fully take him out, but it can definitely postpone him a little bit. So I think they are roughly equal, but to fully figure out which one truly has the better manipulation of how they go into the real world, we need to look at a couple things first. Starting with their intelligence, this one is actually pretty close, but also kind of clear-cut at the same time. Both of them have a little bit of a childlike view on things. The Locust has an actual childlike curiosity, and Larry mostly panders to children to develop a connection with them. But the difference is that Larry has shown way more in terms of direct intelligence. The Locust isn't dumb and can potentially trick people and use their worry to allow them to connect to his world so he can attack them, but Larry actively knows how to cater to other people and has a way more direct interactions with people and knows how to manipulate events to get what he wants, and knows how to dispatch of any threat that goes against what he wants. But also just has a much better understanding of what he is doing, while the Locust seems like it does what it does out of necessity more than meaningful actual attempts. So in my opinion, that gives Larry the overall advantage, but when it comes to their abilities, it doesn't matter that much when comparing them in this context, because their connection with electrical manipulation is almost never used for combat purposes. But the Locust might actually have a little bit of an advantage here, because some of his actual abilities can be used in combat, like him being able to morph his arms into almost blade-like appendages, and being able to grow in size seemingly. But to see if that matters, let's take a look at a couple different categories. Starting with their physicality. These two are incredibly strong, especially compared to actual people, although there is some major differences. The Locust is probably stronger, at least at full size, because at full size, it is able to output around 2.85 times greater than any direct things we've been able to calculate for Larry. However, Larry is absolutely faster, with Larry being anywhere around from 2.04 to 2.6 times greater, even at the best theoreticals you could get for the Locust. And the Locust's speed is a pretty big highball for it. And Larry could potentially even be more powerful than the Locust when factoring in its electrical control, which is so much higher than anything we gave for the Locust. But this is a little debatable if this actually translates into direct strength. It is electrical control after all, and not exactly Larry has ever outputted physically in the film before. You can argue either way, but for the sake of this debate, I will not be giving it to Larry in this case, just to make things a little more interesting. But ignoring that fact, the Locust seems to have a higher strength than Larry is faster than it, but that might not matter in the end when we look at some other things, because let's take a look at their experience. Larry pretty handedly has this one. While neither of them have necessarily gone up against a monster like the other on screen, it is stated that Larry would be able to defend you from its own kind. Not to mention, Larry grew up in a dimension filled with other monsters. And the fact that most of these monsters are probably similar to Larry in some aspect means that Larry would rather be the same or stronger than them if Larry can confidently defend his friend from them. Especially since the Locust is practically alone in its dimension and has no confirmed connection to anything. The only thing it has done is attack people, which Larry has done the exact same thing, and while the Locust has more direct killing experience, Larry should still take this one relatively easily because the Locust's killing seems to be more out of instinct. But to figure this out in full, let's look at their weaknesses. And for the sake of this debate, we are going to assume that Larry has his full story read, which is both an upside and a downside for Larry at the same time. Because with his full story read, he can stay into the world for a lot longer, but also loses his invisibility that he would get beforehand. But even then, as we stated, he can't stay outside his domain forever, so he has to do whatever he's doing quickly, or at least around electrical devices. The Locust, on the other hand, has a couple weaknesses that we've stated before. Like, for one, it actually has to break through the screen in order to actually get into our domain, and can actually be shut off, which is something Larry can actually accomplish just by existing because he controls the electrical device. So you could argue that Larry could just shut off the Locust's connection to our world in the first place if this were to ever be a traditional interaction between the two. But since that is a little too basic of an end, let's see how he does against in a direct fight. And again, while the Locust theoretically has a higher physical strength compared to Larry, at least at its full size, but Larry has a bit more advantages besides speed that make it a little too much for the Locust to handle, especially since the strength gap isn't that big. And again, that's giving the Locust the benefit of the doubt when it comes to strength, and not giving Larry his higher end electrical potential that could also potentially scale to his attack potency. But even ignoring all of that for Larry, Larry just holds all of the other advantages that matter, in a fight like this at least. He's more experienced, more intelligent, and even when his connection is lost from our world, he can just come back through any electrical device, which the Locust is not going to figure out that easily that Larry would be hurt if you destroy electronics. It took basically the entire film for even normal people to figure that out. And even if the Locust did figure this out, this wouldn't stop Larry at all, since devices don't need to be on in order for Larry to actually come in. If anything, this would just slightly bother him at best. And the Locust isn't exactly going to retreat from a fight like this, at least not from what we've seen of it in Dr. Nowhere. And one more thing needs to be mentioned. The Locust organ harvesting is only something he's ever been shown to do when he's already overwhelmed someone. There is very little evidence to suggest he can just steal your organs automatically, because he has to catch up to you for one, and the fact that Larry is going to be fighting back and is faster, the Locust isn't really going to have much of a chance to just take his organs from his body, and is very unlikely to fully overwhelm Larry, if at all, with that greater strength advantage that he might have. So I think what it comes down to in the end is who has more advantages and better win conditions. Both of them can theoretically win in a physical fight. If I had to say who I think personally stands out a little better, I personally believe Larry just slightly takes it in a physical fight. But he also just has ways to permanently stop the Locust from even getting back to the fight in the first place, with him most likely being able to just stop the connection from the Locust's world. So I think regardless if you give Larry that electrical scaling or not, while it would change the difficulty, I think in the end he's just a little too much for the Locust to handle here, since he can disable his connection to our world and also win a direct combat interaction. So, while the Locust is an extremely threatening character, but ultimately Larry's drive for connection beats out the Locust's hunger. So when it comes down to these misunderstood monsters, only one could truly win in the end of the day. Larry wins. Or is that the only way that this could actually play out? What if there could be a different end between these two? Because, despite these two beings being horrifying to us, would they see each other as that? Because both creatures seemingly want some type of connection, and Larry could potentially see the true nature of the Locust, the one that is a child, the one that is alone, and the one that needs a friend. And ultimately, I don't think Larry would ignore this. I could see Larry potentially wanting to make friends out of the Locust, and when all things said and done, take away its pain, and it would extend its hand out in friendship. And honestly, I see the Locust taking it, being driven by its curiosity and potential wanting for something of a connection. They could be each other's friend, and ultimately, this isn't an interaction that needs to end in one losing. Maybe in the end, both can win. Because in the end, friendship is the best possible ending for anyone to have.